Question. Oh, and the date. Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, getting older is tougher. Every day I'm finding out just how tough getting older is. Tuesday, August 30th. So, Tuesday, August 30th. I thank you for that, Yeah, well, I suppose if it keeps us humble, then there's some good to all that too. So, I'm waiting for that person to come walking in here late, but they haven't got here yet. All right, so anyway, there's that. We have the book table over here, and so afterwards we'll go ahead and do that, but it's 2 minutes after. You know about memberships, you know about that, and you know about the meeting, and you know that Dr. Kezele is an excellent speaker and a great boss to work for as well. So if you'll bow your heads with me, we'll have a brief word of prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for, again, raising up these incredible resources that we can avail ourselves of to learn more about the truth of your word. It is the history book of the universe, and the more we study, the more in awe we become of you for having the wisdom to orchestrate all of this. And we want to just give you the praise tonight for all the things that we're going to learn. Thank you for equipping Dr. Kezele to be able to give these presentations. And we pray that you will guide him tonight as he delivers to us message about the history of where all the different languages and the planet came from. And we thank you for all of this in the name of our Savior Jesus. Amen. All right, I don't think I have anything else to say. So now.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate all the work you do here and in Sherlock.
You are most welcome.
Good evening, folks. I think you'll find this a different talk. Most presenters talk about either stars, rocks, or biology. So this is not a frequently presented topic, but it's one of my favorites. So, we're going to have lots of fun. All right. Hi, Pete. So, the evolutionists want to say that there's a parallel with biological evolution and the evolution of languages. So that's their model that they try to make things look like. So they say that the change in grammar is becoming more complicated with time, but actually in reality, we are simplifying grammar with time. They also want to say that things happen with vocabulary by random chance events, as they say supposedly that the random chance mutations cause speciation, which in genetics absolutely kills that idea. They also want to say that sound shifts are random. Again, everything has to be random rather than having consistency. And they want to say that languages change in a uniform manner. In other words, the same slow rate forever in the past that they would like to say that it happens today. But again, languages change quickly in periodic fashion, not over a constant rate. And change occurs with contact among two different people groups with two different languages, not in isolation as they would like us to think. And it is the creation orchard model, not the evolutionary tree, orchard or forest. So take this with you. That's the gist of the whole talk tonight. And I'll repeat this slide at the end. Okay, and then after the flood, it's the Babel orchard or forest, not the evolutionary tree. So here's the outline of the talk. First, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the other stuff that involves the ability to express ourselves, whether it be in written language, with using hand, with using the eyes, or whether it's oral language, using the ears and the voice to communicate. So what structures are needed for language? Well, just as I'm speaking to you, I'm having to take a breath. I'm having to use these muscles to move the diaphragm and the muscles in the ribs to get enough air in there to cause those vocal cords to vibrate. And so all those things are involved with being able to generate sound. And then these vocal cords are very fine structures with tremendous gory detail and how they're put together so that we can alter the pitch, have high and low sounds, and also the quality of the sound that we make. And they have their innervation. And so here are some of the nerves involved with the control of these muscles so that as we use this structure here, known, at least in the fellows as Adam's apple, the larynx, we can modulate the sounds and make the various things that we do to communicate. So there are various nerves involved here. The laryngeal nerve has two different major divisions, the superior and the what's called recurrent. And it's called recurrent because it goes down and loops around the aorta and comes back up. And evolutionists say, oh, that's poor design. If God is a designer, he's a bad designer, if things were designed. Well, actually, that's not true, but because the issue is there are branches on the recurrent laryngeal nerve that involve the structures in the chest as well. And that the tissue that becomes the heart in its ultimate location actually starts higher up in this region and migrates down. So it's not bad design at all. It's economy of design, actually. And then here you see finer details about the vocal cords and the muscles that cause the alteration of the vocal cords to make the different sounds, the different pitches. And then to modulate those sounds, we use the lips, the tongue, the teeth, the nasal cavity even. All of these things are part of how we form the different sounds that we use to communicate. And one of the purposes of the sinuses is to be able to add resonance to the sound when we speak. That's why sometimes we say if someone has a stuffy nose and their sinuses are clogged, they have a nasal sound to their speech because of the loss of that resonance. So,
all right. Explain to him that the men with the guns are bad men and we have to put them to sleep.
He wants to know how did all those people get in there.
No, they're not. You explain.
1 hour, then we move. I'm gonna have a snooze.
Dear Miss Thompson, your abductors have been injected with an immobilizer. When they go to sleep, you must disarm them. Tell him he must give her the note only after he shot all the men. And when he shoots, he must pull back on the thread very quickly so the man can think it was a horsefly or a wasp that stung him. He's fast, it'll work. He must dip the needle each time.
Those fascinating clicking sounds that you hear are a part of their vocabulary, of their alphabet, you could say. They have 3 different kinds of clicking sounds. I wish I could make them. But it's amazing the range of different kinds of sounds that can be made in our speech. And then to be able to perceive those sounds, the sound waves coming through the air strike the eardrum, and it moves about the width of an atom of hydrogen. That's how much. And it's amazing how we can pick up all this stuff that we hear. And then, oops, I went too fast. And then that sound is transmitted through those 3 small bones to a membrane, and then the sound is transmitted into a fluid in the inner ear, and then that fluid causes hair cells to move, and the motion of those hair cells causes ionic changes, which then triggers a nerve signal, which then is transmitted to the brain. I'd sure like to know how that evolved.
Yeah, what did it evolve from?
So supposedly the building blocks of language evolved 30 to 40 million years ago. There is so much garbage that is published out there. So we have here this sentence, the dog who bit the cat ran away. All right. The researchers found that Brazilian monkeys, chimpanzees, and humans were readily able to process the relationships between both adjacent and non-adjacent sound elements. So this is their way of trying to say that somehow in all these millions of years, sounds were being able to be perceived, and that this process evolved through the apes, etc., blah, blah, blah. And the quote here is, this indicates that this critical feature of language already existed in our ancient primate ancestors. Gary Larson has a great cartoon, The Far Side, and one of the cartoons has 2 panels. In one of it, the master is saying to the dog, bad dog, Ginger, you chewed up the newspaper, Ginger. Don't do that anymore, Ginger, and make sure that you don't mess yourself inside the house, Ginger. And then the other panel is what the dog hears. Blah, 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 Ginger, blah, 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 Ginger, blah, 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 Ginger, blah, Ginger. Well, when I read this kind of stuff, I keep thinking blah, 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 Ginger. So. Then there's this business of being able to see the written word. And the complexity of the eye is amazing. It's absolutely astounding. And actually, the major part of the focusing of light is done by the cornea, that thick structure that's the very first thing that the light encounters. And cornea refers to the root meaning as horn, because it's of a proteinaceous, horny material. And then the light passes through clear fluid in front of the lens and the lens itself, which does the fine focusing, and then through a gelatinous fluid, and then finally strikes the retina at the back. And so on the right-hand side of the slide here, you see the representation of the photosensitive cells, the rods and the cones that perceive. The cones deal with color, the rods with black and white vision. And the photoreception portion of the cells is actually the part at the bottom pointing downwards, backwards at the back end. So the situation here is just the opposite of a man-made camera, where the photoreceptors are pointed at what it is you're trying to take a picture of. And so the evolutionists jump on this and say, oh, this is terrible design. If there was a designer, God's a terrible designer. Well, they're either displaying ignorance or purposeful ignoring the discovery of what's called Mueller cells. And those Mueller cells actually are like fiber optic cables which transmit the light through all of these layers of cells here to where the photoreceptors are at the very bottom end of the slide there. And so the question is, well, why did God design this? So these photoreceptors are pointed away from the light and they're at the very back end of the retina. Well, that's because the amount of energy expended in the biochemical reactions of vision is humongous. It's estimated up to 20% of the glucose that's burned involving the brain involves vision. And that generates a lot of heat, and so where all that work is done has to be next to where the blood vessels are to take away the heat and also to provide the fuel and take away the metabolic waste products. So it's actually very good design, because if that wasn't done, then those cells would overheat and they wouldn't be able to function, you wouldn't be able to see. And also it wouldn't serve to place the blood vessels in front of the photoreceptors either, because that would block the vision. So that's why God designed it this way, and obviously we see quite well with this design. So the assumptions on the part of the evolutionists are sad, to say the least. And then in order to control the amount of light that gets in, we have this circular arrangement of muscle and the fibers holding the tissue so that the pupil can be adjusted to, as we deal with either the light being very bright or very dark. As you know, you leave a movie theater and you go outside and all that light coming in, your pupils need to be able to shut down. And also, you're able to focus better when you have the pupil more constricted. So these are very fine structures, very delicate with tremendous amount of detail. And again, how would this stuff all have evolved? And then the hand. I could spend a whole hour just talking about the hand and the complexity with the nerves, the muscles, the blood vessels, the tendons, the ligaments, and the tissue planes separating these various structures. So here's a view looking at the palmar aspect, and then here's a view looking through, slicing through the hand right here, just to give you an idea of the complexity of this thing. And I marvel, I love classical music, and I absolutely marvel at for example, well, all the musicians, but the pianists in particular, with what they can do. It is astounding. And to tell me that thing just evolved, and yet that very same thing can be curled up and can deliver a lot of force and pound somebody who needs to be put in their place. You know, what a design. It's absolutely astounding. And this is a different view than from the top of the hand, the dorsal side, showing you the various structures. And so to be able to then to write and to put down the written language. And then the evolutionists never want to talk about the software. They only want to talk about the hardware. Because you always have to have the changes. If you're going to have this evolution happening, you have to have all these changes in the software as well to alter the function. For example, for a bird to have a limb change from walking to flying, that software has to happen as well. And they never want to talk about that. And so this diagram shows the various parts of the brain that deal, very special sections deal with various parts of what we need for communication. Part of it's for coming up with the idea. Part of it is then for the motor control to write. Part of it, different part is for being able to read it. The visual cortex is in the back of the brain. Different part for listening. Different part for the muscles to control the larynx, etc. So all these various parts are with that software embedded in there. It's just amazing. And there's the word software. So question here is information inherent in matter? Does matter give rise to information?
No.
And you say no. Why?
Because matter is a medium, but it has to be arranged by an intelligent source to be able to carry that information.
Okay, so in other words, we use matter to store information, but intelligence has to be present to give the information.
Ink on a page means nothing unless it's in a typed form that we can understand.
Does information organize itself? The answer is no. And so where does it come from? There has to be intelligence. There has to be a code. And there has to be a decoder. Now, with the analogy of DNA, DNA carries the code, but you have to have the ribosomes and the transfer RNA to decode the messenger RNA to get the information to make the proper protein. So same thing here. We need to have decoder for language. So not only does the code have to develop, the decoding ability has to be there as well, and it has to be from intelligence to do this. And so who must this possessor of greater intelligence and provider code be? And it's got to be the God of the Bible. Well, the evolutionary model for language, a couple of these slides are very painful, but I'll get through them. A single original language, or perhaps a few, the different linguistic kinds we now observe through gradual transformation from earlier ancestral forms. So this is obviously an evolutionist saying this is their parallel to the biological model. Another quote here, languages developed into and from one another over time. I always love that over time phrase. That's so specific. Through piecemeal construction and unplanned transformations. there's the randomness. Though not perfectly Darwinian, this ongoing transformation is clearly, I love the way they use clearly. They use the word clearly when they don't have any way to show what they're talking about. An evolutionary process, it's the same thing in the math textbooks when they say it is obvious.
Yes.
An evolutionary process and a close analogy to biological evolution in its most significant aspects. So here is their tree, that from that one first cell that they can't explain how it came into being. Everything else descended from that with modification. Well, the same idea is from that one first language, all languages came from that on that one tree. So this is that desired model they would like to be able to present to us and show that this is how things came about. Well, here is a book that was written, Unraveling the Evolution of Language. And then here is a paper that was written. The title itself is bad enough. Synthesizing the Origins of Language and Meaning Using Co-Evolution, Self-Organization, and Level Formation. So out of his conclusion, I took a few sentences here. This paper proposed a number of mechanisms that together might explain the origins of language: evolution, coevolution, self-organization, and level formation. Each of these mechanisms is known to play a critical role in the origins of complexity in biosystems, which justifies that they are also applied to the origins and evolution of language. However, in contrast with most researchers today, I propose to apply these mechanisms not to biological structures, for example, genes or neural networks, but rather to language itself. For example, no catastrophic genetic mutation is proposed to explain the origins of syntax. Syntax means word order. Word order. Rather, syntax is hypothesized to originate spontaneously through level formation based on the pressure to blah, 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 blah. I can't handle any more of that. All right, but here's what I love. This quote here. But we do not understand language itself. Indeed, language is so incomprehensible a problem that the language we use for discussing the matter is itself becoming incomprehensible. This fellow must have read that other guy's paper. Well, I think this is most appropriate for that situation in Romans 1:21, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. The word futile refers to leaking water. You can carry the bucket as many times as you want, but the water never gets there because it leaks out. And so you never get the water where it's supposed to be. So, professing to be wise, they became fools. And I love that part of the verse because as a professor at Arizona Christian University, I have to say that so many of my colleagues in the secular schools profess themselves to be wise, and they are foolish in what they unfortunately teach to the students. All right, so the evolutionary model invokes random events, things becoming more increasingly complex without intelligent input and in a uniformitarian time frame at a constant rate with no change, no variation. That's their way of looking at things. Whoops. All right, so structure and shift of language sounds. Let's talk about that here. Okay, I'm going to have a little quiz here for you. Okay, this is the kanji, the Chinese, all right? And so here, this particular character means vessel, generic container, some kind of a vessel, some kind of a container. For example, we use the term blood vessel that contains our blood in the circulatory system. All right, add to it this character, which means mouth. And now you add the number 8. So put those three things together, and that is the symbol for the word boat. Where do you think that came from? Could it be chapter 7 and 8 of Genesis, possibly? It's amazing. There are quite a few. There's a couple books written showing how there are still a lot of remnants from those early chapters of Genesis that are embedded in the written Chinese language, showing that at a time in the past they had the truth, but have lost it since then. All right, so let's talk about some sounds here. What is a phoneme? A phoneme is a basic sound of speech. For example, w, o, or k. There's 4 phonemes there. Put them together, we get the word work. Or t, r, a, b, a, h, o. Trabajo in Spanish. Or a, r, b, e, I, te, Arbeit in German. R, a, b, o, te, a. Работа in Russian. So all of these mean work. And you can see there's relationship between the other 3 besides English by just changing the order of the A and the R. You can see there's a common root there because they belong to the same Indo-European family of languages. So morphemes then are the smallest units of language which have meaning, in other words, syllables. So the phonemes are like the building bricks to make morphemes. Morph referring to form, phone referring to sound. So that would be syllables. So for example, we use the root here, work, or in Russian, работа, and then we say workable. Работоспособный. I have to add the adjective ending on it. Работоспособный. Okay, so this is how, in an intelligent manner, we build vocabulary, not some random means. Or unworkable, не работоспособный. So it's very logical how we build vocabulary. It's not some random thing. And then showing again the common roots here with these other languages as well in the Indo-European family of languages. English is the outlier. The rest of them have the same basic roots there. And he goes, oh, 4 steps to the left and then 3 to the right. What kind of dance was I doing? The egg beater dance. All right, so we have to get the sounds right, just like you have to get the steps right. So what happened in the first millennium BC was what's called the first Germanic sound shift. So when you're going from Latin to English, there's this change of P to F, pater and father. Well, we use paternity or paternal, right, to mean father. Or F to bear, fair like the ferry, to take to bear, to carry the car across the river. Or the G sound to the CK, genou to knee, knee, to genuflect, to bend the knee. Or we say for hound, canine, right? The C to the H, canine, hound. Or in German, Hund, das Hund. And then for the D to a T change, December, the 10th month, and the calendar before Julius Caesar played around with it. And then from December to 10, or dent, the dentist, to 10 for tooth. And then, T for tooth. And then T to TH, tenu as in tenuous, a tenuous chance of something happening, a rather slight chance of something happening, a thin chance. All right, so that was what happened in the 1st century BC. Then there was the second Germanic sound shift, where these changes happened. So going from P to F, so from ship to Schiff, or sleep to schlafen, plow to Pflug, apple to Apfel. And then in the T to S, eat, essen, delicatessen. That, das. Time, Zeit. The T to TS. 2, zwei. And then cat, Kezele. Make, machen, K to ch, machen. Cake, Kuchen. Good, gut, D to T. God, Gott, de Tag. And then TH to D, think, denken. Thirsty, durstig, ich habe Durst, I'm thirsty. Brother, bruder, and mouth, Mund. So these were consistent changes that happened. They weren't just random, mixed up things that happened those time periods. These changes occurred about the 7th or 8th century AD. So then the question is, are sound shifts uphill, downhill, or neutral?
Yes.
They're actually neutral because they don't change the meaning. They don't change the meaning. Okay, that's the answer. Okay, are the sound shifts random or consistent? And they are consistent. And so the significance of this, again, is that this is not random, miscellaneous, hodgepodge stuff here. Now, let's get into some real fun here with the rules of language. We'll talk about grammar, how we arrange things, semantics, dealing with meaning, and syntax, dealing with word order. So grammar, a system of rules that enable us to speak and understand. Semantics, rules to derive meaning from those morphemes made up of the phonemes. And in syntax, rules we use to order words into sentences. So here, will work as food. Due to his grammar mistake, Wilbur found a position. It just wasn't the one he wanted. All right. Now, in English, we've done away with so much of grammar, it's unreal. We've paid a price for it, which I'll talk about in a bit. But putting together the various languages in the Indo-European family of languages, altogether there are 8 different what we call cases. Nominative, but in English we call that the subject. Accusative, in English, we call it the direct object. Genitive, we call that the possessive. Dative, we call that the indirect object. Instrumental, we don't even talk about that. It just got wrapped into prepositional. Ablative is negation. And then locative refers to location. We rolled that into prepositions. And vocative is when you address someone. You say, Don. So there's an ending for that vocative case, that I'm addressing you. I'm talking to you. I want your attention. So these are the 8 cases. Now, I don't think any language today has all 8 cases. For example, Russian uses 6 of them, German uses 4 of them, combining things to get down to 6 or to 4. Czech uses 7, Latin uses 7. But I'm going to give you an example here of a sentence that uses all of these cases. John took Luke's book away from Peter and said, Paul, in Rome, I will give the book on that table with the note written with this pen to Mark. Okay? So, John is the subject. That's the nominative case. Book, that's the object that is acted upon by the verb. So that's what they call the accusative case. We call it the direct object. Luke's, the possessive, genitive. To Mark, that's the person to whom. By the way, do you ever hear anybody today use whom? It's died. In my lifetime, it has died. I still use it on occasion. My students say, what? Okay. Is given, the indirect object. That's the dative case. With this pen, so that's the instrument, the instrumental case, the instrument used to accomplish an action. Away from Peter, okay, that's the ablative, the negation, separation. In Rome, the location, the prepositional or locative case, location. And then Paul, that's the vocative. I'm talking to you, Paul. So get Paul's attention. So this is what English once upon a time used to have, ages ago. Well, how do you know which case is being used with that noun or adjective? And the answer is you give them different endings. Well, not in English. But in the other languages, the ending on the noun and the adjective changes with how it's used, which case it has. So for example, in Latin, mensa means table, stol in Russian means table, der Tisch means table. Okay, so you see, as you look down the column, they have different endings for these different cases. Except in German, it's not the noun that changes, it's the article, the. And that's why I said one semester of German was too much, and I switched to Russian. I said, forget this. It's impossible. Because in German, you don't know the gender of the noun. The nouns, not in English, but in other languages, nouns have gender. It's a masculine noun, or it's a feminine noun, or it's a neuter noun. And in the Scandinavian languages, they even have another thing as well. And in German, you can't look at the noun or to determine what its gender is. The ending rarely, not frequently, tells you what the gender is. And there's no correlation. You just have to memorize the gender of every cotton picking noun. And I said, to heck with this. In Spanish, it's much simpler, you know. It's el sol, the sun, it's masculine. Or la mesa, the table, it's feminine. You can tell by looking at the end what its gender is. And here, for the word he, in Russian, it has all these different changes because each case has a different thing. In English, we have preserved a bit of this. That's why his is possessive, genitive, and to him, well, we still say to him instead of to he, so far. So far, because we've done away with to whom. And then for the others, it's him, him, him. All right. And then with who, here we are. Again, you have the different endings in Russian and German, and in English, we still use whose for possessive. Whose book is this? And then whom is just about dead. Who did you give the book to instead of to whom did you give the book? And so here's this business of gender of nouns. So, and it's really funny how arbitrary it is from language to language. Because, for example, the word for table, stol, is masculine in Russian. Okay. The word for book is kniga, and it's feminine. And then the word for sun, as I mentioned, el sol in Spanish, it's masculine, but in German it's feminine. Die Sonne, it's feminine. The sun is feminine. And then in Russian it's neuter. It's solnce is the word for sun in Russian. So there are different endings for the different genders of nouns, for the different cases, for singular and plural. So for example, you could have up to as many with 6 cases and 3 genders, 18, singular and plural. You could have up to 36 different endings. But they combine some of them, so there's not that many. So English, we just did away with almost all of that. We still have whose and a few other things, and his and hers, but otherwise we've killed most of that stuff. And then, I mentioned Swedish and Dutch and in Danish, they have what's called the common gender, in addition to the neuter and the masculine and the feminine. Maybe they were thinking about what's happening today, you know, with all these woke people. Okay, woof, woofs, woofing, woofed. So let's talk about verbs. All right, PIE, Proto-Indo-European, that first common Indo-European language from which so many others have developed with time. All right. There's this business, Russian still retains this business of aspects. And so before you start your sentence, you have to know if the verb of motion has a determined destination or not. So the terms used are determinate or indeterminate for the motion. Do you know your destination or not? And then also here with perfective and imperfective, and we have shades of this in English, is whether the action is completed, finished, one time, one and done, or is it repetitive, or is it habitual, or incomplete, or ongoing. And those would be the imperfective. So then in Russian, you have to know, as I said, both whether you know where you're going or you don't, and if it is completed or not. And so you have 3 different infinitive forms for the same verb. And then you have to play with those. So you have to know which one of those you're doing first. So it's either yechat, yezdit, or uyechat. And that's, for me, the hardest part of Russian, is that right there. And then changes in the ending of the verb and the addition of prefixes versus helping verbs. So in Russian, they'll change whether the motion is toward or away. They'll use uyechat or priyechat, whether it's away or toward. So they use prefixes. We use what we call helping verbs, and we say, for example, we will arrive. In that sense, it's still like German, wir werden ankommen. But in Russian, they do it all in one word, приедем. But we don't have this complexity. So what I'm demonstrating here is we are simplifying through all these things I'm showing you, through the loss of the cases and not having gender for nouns, we are simplifying. Okay, next category. Good this is, Sam I am, a kindred spirit, Yoda finds. What we're getting at here is word order, syntax. Okay, so this is the very same sentence. Mark dal knigu Ioana Luku, knigu Ioana dal Luku Mark, Luku Mark Ioana dal knigu, Ioana Luku Mark knigu dal knigu Luku Mark Ioana. So the point I'm making is the word order doesn't matter in Russian because the meaning is preserved in all those endings that we have to deal with. But in English, we do it this one way. Mark gave the book of John to Luke. But we can't change that order because if we do, we change the meaning of the sentence. And that is why people who are learning English as a second language have so much trouble with this business of syntax, of word order, of getting it, grasping that they have to get the words in exactly the right order. That's the price we pay for doing away with all those cases and all those endings. So somehow that information still has to be conveyed, and we do it through syntax. So showing you with the colored ones in Russian, it doesn't matter the word order, it's the same meaning. But when you change the endings on those nouns, as I did in the colored words here, that conveys the meaning that I have for each accompanying sentence in English. So they have to use all those different endings to make the changes that we do just by changing the word order, syntax. Pretty crazy. Okay, so most of you here, I think, are old enough to remember this one. Fleas, dogs fleas, my has fleas dogs, fleas my dog has. Right, that little ditty, my dog has fleas. Right? The kids today, they have no clue. None whatsoever. Too many times in class, I have to explain something that I'm trying to use as an analogy, and then so I have to go give them the history. So, okay. All right. So, is the complexity of structure, the grammar of languages, increasing or decreasing? It's decreasing. We are simplifying. Why? Well, in English, I think it's a combination of being lazy and also wanting to get things done faster, be more efficient. which really isn't being lazy. All right. Does the structure, the grammar of languages change in isolation or in contact with other languages?
Isolation.
You had a 50% chance. In contact. In New Guinea, the island of New Guinea, there are some 800 different languages. Because, just that one island, because of the incredibly rugged mountainous terrain there, with all of these valleys separated from each other, and those peoples remain separated from each other, and so they didn't have change in their languages, and their languages are as they were for ages and ages. So it's when one people group speaking a language come in contact with the people group speaking a different language, that's what causes changes, because you're both grasping, trying to figure out what the other one's trying to say, so you end up borrowing words into each language. Just think how rich English is the richest language and vocabulary in the planet, because it went all over the planet and borrowed words from every other language in existence. And so the dictionary in English, the comprehensive ones, are far larger than any other language on the planet for that reason.
And is that what accounts for this push for simplification, because it's incorporating so much?
Well, okay, that's a different issue, because with the vocabulary, we develop finer shades of meaning. Think about this. How do we say small? Well, you can say small. You can say petite. You can say something is micro. You can say something is nano. And we have many different ways for different degrees. So we develop this understood spectrum of just how small something is with these different words. So the vocabulary is increasing due to contact, but we simplify the grammar just to make it easier. Oh boy. Okay. All right. So then, how goes the obedience training? Great. Watch this. Heel. Next week, we start on semantics. So semantics are meaning, and that is tightly related to context. So in English, not only is syntax so critical, context is very important in order to make sure you have the correct meaning. So here we have some fun with leg. So what's leg?
Distance between 2 points.
Okay, leg of a person, right? How about a chair or table? How about part of a journey? How about give me a leg up? How about now you're pulling my leg? Now what's really funny with these phrases is, we're saying, that, someone's having fun with us and not really telling us quite the way it is. In Spanish, they say, me estás tomando el pelo, you're pulling the hair. Well, that's somewhat similar to pulling the leg, but in Russian, it's hilarious. They say, nie wieszaj mnie lopszu na uszy, don't hang noodles on my ears. All right? Log. Well, log of a tree. How about a record of activities or events, like in star log, date, whatever? I slept like a log. You say, what? Well, when we say that, what are we talking about? We're talking about sleeping very soundly, not moving. Well, in Spanish, it's similar. Yo dormí como un tronco, like the trunk of a tree. Similar concept. But in Russian, it's really hilarious. It's Я спал без задних ног. I slept without hind legs. But when you think about it, it has that same meaning. I didn't move. No hind legs, you're not moving. Right? Я спал без задних ног. They logged 30 trees today, meaning that they were cut down. We logged 20 miles while hiking through the forest yesterday. Referring to recording the 20 miles. We logged 15 knots this leg. Okay, now nautical distance in the portion of a journey was recorded. He tied those 15 knots together. Oops, now we're talking about a rope, so you got to have context. But he ought not to tie that knot, for it is for naught, and that's naughty, and that's not a naughty problem. Do you see how people trying to learn English just throw up their hands? It's tough. Context, syntax. Whoops. Let's see. This finger pad is so sensitive. Okay, now what about the change, semantics, meaning, what about the change of words with distance? Okay, bonnet and boot. Well, are we talking about something on the head and what I'm wearing right now? No, in England you're talking about the hood and trunk of a car. Lorry and pavement. So that's a truck, and you better not drive that truck on the pavement, because in England the pavement is not the street, it's the sidewalk. So you stay off the pavement with your lorry. And then there's the word lorry with one R, which is a parakeet in Indonesia. Gravy and biscuits. Well, we think of gravy, but they're talking about sauce and, chips, okay, what we would call home fried potatoes, right? So there's a difference there. Flat is an apartment, lift is an elevator, nappy, diaper, and nursing is bottle feeding. So a male can nurse in England with the bottle. And then he spit the dummy. What in the world? That one's from Australia. Anybody remember the tennis player John McEnroe? And he would throw these unbelievable fits of anger. That's what that's referring to. Okay, so the dummy is the pacifier, and the baby is upset, and the dummy came out of the mouth, the pacifier. So he spit the dummy because he got mad, and his pacifier fell out. I thought that's really appropriate for McEnroe. All right. Don't come the raw prawn to me, mate. Okay, that's also from Australia. And that's a less genteel way of saying that you're pulling my leg. Okay, it's more rude. And then the change in meaning with time. Okay, oh yeah, I should have shown the map of Australia first, before that. Okay, well here we have 8 items or fewer. But that's not grammatically correct. It should be 8 items or less. All right, change in time. So here is from 1,000 years ago. This is Old English. Old English. I won't even try and pronounce it. But here's the very same text in 500 years ago. Now this we can decipher much more easily. So notice either, the I is not there, and then else without the E, and then lean, the different spelling there, and then of course the word mammon for money. And then from 500 years ago to today. So that is Matthew 6:24 and 25. So with time, things change. And this has led to an issue when some people who try to re-decipher Scripture to accommodate evolutionary time frame, in Genesis 1, they take the word replenish to mean how we use it today rather than how it was used 400 years ago when King James was written. Replenish did not mean to refill 400 years ago. It just meant to fill. Today, we use it to mean to refill. And so they use that to try to come up with this business of Lucifer's flood and refilling the earth and all this other baloney, trying to find some compromise with evolution. Okay, semantics. How do we build words? Okay, so finalize. We convert a lot of nouns into verbs by putting that "-is" ending on it. Making new words for new situations, such as when this computer technology required a new term for a bit of information. They came up with byte, with that spelling. Then for drugs, new names, because we're making so many new molecular compounds, new drugs. And I think because of all these things I'm talking about, half the country's on Prozac. Then zoology, so the study of animals. Astrobiology, I think that one is wishful thinking. Okay, I don't think there's any life out there. Nanotechnology, referring to technology on a very small scale, 10 to the minus ninth, in terms of how many zeros after a decimal point, 9 decimals, 9 zeros. And then we borrow words, as I mentioned, from one language to another. So the word Soviet actually means advisory, believe it or not. Okay, it actually means advisory. Kimono, the robe from Japan. Wadi from the Middle East, what we would call here a wash, dry wash. Tamale, who does not know and enjoy tamales? Monsoon, this one has an interesting history. When I was in high school in the Phoenix area, no one here in the Phoenix area had ever heard of the word monsoon. Yet in 1966, when I went down to the U of A in Tucson as a freshman, people down there were talking about monsoons. And I said, what are you guys talking about? So just in that distance of 120 miles, there was that word used there that had not yet come up to Phoenix. Well, it came from the Middle East by the countries bordering on the Indian Ocean, but it got there from South Africa, and it got there from the Dutch, referring to seasonal storms with tremendous winds and rain. So it went from Dutch to Afrikaans to the Middle East, and then finally made its way to Tucson somehow. And then finally up to Phoenix. And then, of course, now the modern retracing of that is the word I don't like at all, haboob. When they use that for these dust storms. It's a dust storm, folks, you know. I think they've kind of backed off. I don't know if I don't hear it as much as we did a few years ago, but crazy. So petite from the French and petit, both same root meaning small. Well, petite for a lady who's short and nice and slim. Petty, like petty cash or a petty officer in the Navy of lower grade or a smaller amount. Tango, borrowed that from Argentina, the dance. Kiwi can mean a fruit. It can mean a person from New Zealand or the bird native to New Zealand. So you have to have context for the proper meaning, the semantics. Weltanschauung, worldview. This is a term that's been borrowed in that form from German into English in philosophical literature. And then we have some more fun here with der Hintergrundinformation. Okay, Germans love to combine words and make big, long words. And that means a piece of background information. Das Krankenhaus. Hospital, but it literally means sick house. And then der Konstantinopolitanischer Dudelstock Pfeifer Macher Kezele. Okay, that one means the bagpipe maker from Constantinople. That's a legitimate word in German. like the musical instrument, the bagpipe. Why a bagpipe maker would be from Constantinople, I don't know. This is a legitimate medical word in English. Pneumo-ultramicroscopic silicovolcanoconiosis. So this means a lung disease with these very small, fine particles of silicon from a volcano.
Was that on a test that you had to take?
Actually, some of that was, we used some of that when I was in training, yeah.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, snafu. This originated in New York when they were installing the telephone lines for the first time, situal, normal, all fouled up. Radar, range and distance.
Radio detection and ranging.
Say again?
Radio detection and ranging.
Thank you. Radio detection and range. UFO, unidentified flying object, laser, light activated stimulation of emitted radiation. Scuba, self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, English second language. And then OK. Now there's a couple versions about OK, but I think the one that's most commonly accepted is that when Martin Van Buren was president back in the 1840s, when he came across something he really, really liked, he would say, oh, that's just like at Old Kinderhook, the name of his estate in upstate New York. That's like old Kinderhook. That's okay. Well, it's become universal. I absolutely was floored when I was in the depths of Siberia and I heard these people speaking total Russian and then okay is in the middle of the sentence. I came here to hear Russian, not okay, you know. So, Gestapo, that is a combination of Geheime Staatspolizei, the secret states police. Kind of like today. VUZ, Vysheye Uchebnoye Zavedenie, Higher Institute of Education. So that referred to any university, any post-high school institution in Russian. That term is used. Now, another way to develop vocabulary is through repetition. In Hawaiian, there are only 13 letters. 13. And so they have to do some repetition in order to be able to expand the vocabulary. So, for example, for this red pencil sea urchin, it's ha uka uka ula ula. All right? Or for this pig-snouted triggerfish, it's humu humu nuku nuku apua'a. All right? So when you hear this stuff, it's like Agnes, it's that heavy chewing sound again. Alrighty, more on semantics. Stress. Wait a minute, that's a minute particle. The farm was used to produce produce. The soldier decided not to desert in the desert. I did not object to the object. And the insurance was invalid for the invalid. So we use this to expand vocabulary. I had to subject the subject to a series of tests, which I have done on occasion. Okay, how about tone? Tone, some languages are tonal. So, for example, in Chinese, Mandarin, ma is horse. Ma is mother. Ma, scold. And ma, morpheme. Wow. So you have to be very careful in how you say this, or otherwise you're calling mother a horse and you're scolding her about morpheme. So, disgusting, just sort of heavy huffing and puffing. So that's how English must sound to someone who speaks a tonal language, such as Mandarin or Thai. Thai is a tonal language as well. Okay, so is vocabulary increasing randomly or by intelligent input? Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. And so he gave us the ability to love, to laugh, to be logical, to think, to be rational. At least he gave that to us. Too many of us aren't using it.
Half the country.
Yeah. So anthropologists. Okay, so that. All right. So let's alter this caption to say linguists. So let's take a tour of the world. I'm going to show you a series of maps, of language maps, to show you the phenomenal diversity and to show you how it's not possible to make this tree that connects everything. There are groups of languages, there are families of languages, but they are distinct from each other. The brighter green color is the Indo-European family. Now you can see how it spread so madly with the European nations doing seafaring and colonization of other parts of the world. So how are languages grouped? Well, linguists compare characteristics of the components of languages such as verb structure, which we've talked about, the use of cases, similarities of vocabulary, rules of syntax, and how sounds are made. So we've talked about all these things. And then they do computer analysis and try to group these things using these various aspects of languages, trying to make this one all-inclusive tree. So here's a map of Latin America, and you see this incredible variety. Now, these colors are not languages, but they're families of languages. And focusing in on the northern part of South America, look at the diversity there. Okay, it is phenomenal. And then here in Mexico and in parts of Central America. Lots of different native languages there. Same in North America. And I've got a black line around that one region here, and that would be the called Uto-Aztec grouping of languages, the northern Uto-Aztec. And then here we have the Navajo here surrounding the Hopi, a totally separate group, different group at all. And remember that we used the Navajo code talkers in World War II. And the Japanese never were able to crack that code. And part of the reason is they had a code within a code. So for example, a butterfly was a helicopter. And so they used the Navajo word for butterfly. Or a fish was a torpedo, that kind of a thing. So there's the Navajo reservation. And you see there the box that it's referred to Athabascan. It's referred to as Southern Athabascan language. Well, that means there must be a Northern Athabascan, and there it is up in Canada and Alaska. They understand each other. Isn't that interesting? Well, when I was in, I'll get back to that in a second. So here, as we head to the Bering Strait, on both sides of that, you see each color is a family of languages, and you see within the yellow, there are all these separate languages in that area, and same on the other side. And then on one of my mission trips to Russia, I was in this region here, the Burdyat Republic, within the Russian Federation. And the gal who was translating there for me was not an ethnic Russian, she was Burdyat. And I said, you know, as I look at the people here, I said, they sure remind me an awful lot of the Navajo. And I said, when I listen to them speak, I said, it seems to have the same kind of speech patterns as the Navajos have. And she said, yeah, I've noticed that too. I said, you know, so what does this kind of make you think? Going from the Ark in the Middle East, heading eastward over the Straits during the Ice Age, and then down to Canada and on down to Arizona. So here are these various languages that were there before the Russians came along. And these are called the Finno-Ugric family of languages. And they are related to Mongolian. Well, that makes sense. Why? Remember Genghis Khan and the Golden Horde sweeping westward, all over across Asia and well into Europe. So what happened is, as the local folks resisted the Mongols, they ended up being concentrated in what today is called Finland, Estonia, and Hungary. Those are Mongolian Finno-Ugric languages, those three. They are not European languages. They are not part of the Indo-European family of languages. And this was a problem for the communists during the Cold War, the Soviet era, because you can see Estonia is due south of Finland, right across the Gulf of Bothnia there. And that Iron Curtain was penetrated by Finnish TV and radio, because the Estonians understood them very well. And so Estonia was a big hole in the Iron Curtain. So from there, then the information they obtained from Finnish media, they transmitted to the rest of the Soviet Union. So they didn't have the control they wanted to have or thought that they had. So in China, there are more than 200 languages in at least 11 families. Mandarin is simply the one that has been mandated to be the overreaching language. And then here, in this part of the world, they gave up trying to group these things, and they used geography to group them, just geography. Austro means south. Australia means south land. That's what the name of the country means. And so these are the Southern Asiatic languages. So you see all these different colors here. It's a lot of different stuff there. And here's some more detail. Okay, this Dravidian group, nobody knows anything about this. This is not part of the Indo-European family. It's a thing totally of its own. And again, there are these different languages within that family. And then Australia has all these different languages, native languages there as well. I mentioned about New Guinea here with 800 languages there. So again, these colors are families of languages, not individual languages. Then across the Pacific, again, they use geography to group them. They don't know what else to do. Oceanic languages. Okay, this is Taiwan, Formosa. Okay, so there's over 15 languages there. And then down into the Indies, the East Indies. Okay, Madagascar, that large island off the east coast of Africa, has all these languages. And they are related to languages on the other side of the Indian Ocean, so it is possible that these were peoples who were displaced by the rising waters in the post-flood period during the Ice Age, when the Ice Age was melting and the oceans were rising again. And those people living in those coastal regions had to move and ended up on Madagascar. And then these colors are used, again, these are just geographical groupings of families. And Hoi San, this is what you heard with those clicking sounds. That's the in this group here, and you see these different symbols for those clicks, the exclamation points, the equal sign, the slashes, the apostrophes. Those are for those different kinds of clicking sounds. They had to figure out some way to, yes?
Is Madagascar related to India in language?
To India? No, I think it's these other languages on the other side of the Indian Ocean.
Because I think that India was against Africa before it migrated to where it was. I just wondered.
Oh, well, that would have been pre-flood, and that would have had nothing to do. Okay, so here are these clicking languages in the southern part of Africa. And then the orange group here, these various languages in these countries. Now Zambia, in the center there of that 10 area, my wife and I worked in a mission hospital there taking care of patients, and there are 30 languages just in Zambia alone. And but they were smart. When they gained their independence, they avoided the problem of having the problem that India has, of picking one of the local languages and having everybody unhappy about it. So instead, they made English the national language, and so everybody then has that common thread to use with English, and it's also been smart for them in terms of being able to do international commerce, etc. And when the language that was spoken in the area we were in, where the red dot is, it was called Tonga. And so I learned a bit of that when I was there. Not so much to speak it, but to understand it. So when I was questioning patients, instead of having to wait for the translator, I could understand the answers and then immediately ask the next question, and save time that way. The red ones here, all these different groups. It's pretty astounding, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And then in the yellow area here, these various languages. Okay, then in the blue area, again, they're using geography to group these things. But you see here Semitic and Cushitic. Back to scripture. All right, so the blue is the Semitic. So that would include Arabic as well as Hebrew and Aramaic. Anybody here see the movie The Passion? You know, they were speaking in Aramaic as well as Latin. Okay, let's go to the Indo-European family. This is where we belong. So these are the 12 groups within the Indo-European family, and then each group has its members of that group. So here is the list of Indo-European languages. Quite a few. So Indo as in Indic. So this is the one grouping, the Indic, and notice it's not where the purple is. The purple is the Dravidian. Okay, so the next group is a very small one, Dardic and Neristani. Again, those are two families, and you see the blow up there with the multiple languages within that group. The Iranian languages, so you can see there's quite a few there for that territory. The Germanic, which is what English historically was a purely Germanic language, that's been changed dramatically. I'll talk about that at the end. And then they're divided into the eastern, the eastern, western, and northern. And you see that all the eastern ones are extinct in yellow. Celtic languages. Now notice that they're all at the very western end of things. But historically, we know that the Celts actually covered all of Europe, and even were down into Turkey. They covered all of that territory, but they got pushed and pushed and pushed. The French consider the Breton language in Brittany in France as barbaric. It's a Celtic language, not a Romance language like French is. So you can see here that these are, yellow ones are extinct, and Cornish has been revived. It's been resurrected through intense effort. Then the Romance languages, we're familiar with many of these. There's some that you may not be aware of, such as Romanian is that pocket in Eastern Europe that's not Slavic and not Germanic. It's a Romance language. And then there's Aero-Romanian and Istro-Romanian, those two small pockets, as well as that area there in Switzerland. So there are those. And so these here are then the Eastern Romance languages and the Western Romance languages. Then there's a black hole. What in the world is that black hole? Anybody know the shepherds that were here in Arizona? The Basques. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I put it in black. It is a black hole because the linguists know nothing about what to do with it. They're totally mystified. It is unrelated to anything in the world. It's its own thing. The Italic languages, which includes Latin, and of course the only reason it's still alive is because of church and university. Otherwise it would be dead as well. So notice that's not Romance, that's a separate group, Italic. Baltic languages, all of which are extinct except for Lithuanian and Latvian. Slavic languages are divided into the Eastern and Western and Southern. And you notice there's that hole there, Hungary, that Mongolian language there, along with Romania, the Romance language. And in Paleo-Balkan, they didn't know what to do with everything else, so they threw all these in together. Two of them are still surviving, Armenian and Albanian, and that is Armenian script. It's pretty interesting. I actually taught in a seminary in Armenia for a few weeks and learned the alphabet just to be able to read the street signs so I could get around and not get lost. Don't remember it now. And then this is Georgian. Now to me that looks like SpaghettiOs. That script on the bottom there. Okay, so in Wikipedia, a language family is a group of related languages said to have descended from a common proto-language. First language. Many languages are known to belong to language families. For many others, however, family relationships are not known and only tentatively proposed. So the number of language families as of October 2006 was, as you see there on the chart, and now these are families, so there were 344 unclassified families of languages. That tree doesn't look too good, does it? Number of languages in the world? In 2006, 6,912, and today about 6,000 plus. Why is this? Well, there are about 2,000 languages that have less than 1,000 speakers. Those languages are in the process of going extinct. Now, what to me is hilarious is the evolutionists say evolution is the thing for everything, and yet extinction is the history we have from the fossil record, and yet they want to do everything in the world to preserve some particular species that's trying to become extinct. And yet, same thing with languages. So we have some people very strenuously trying to keep some of these languages going. So down at the U of A in Tucson, they are working with Scottish Gaelic. Now why in Tucson, Scottish Gaelic, I have no idea. but they're also working with a local language, Hyaki. And Hyaki is only spoken by a few people in these little red pockets here. So in the Phoenix area, in the southeast part of the valley, there's this little tiny town called Guadalupe where there are speakers of Hyaki, as well as these other locations. Well, they're actually related to these folks down in Mexico where you see the red rectangle, linguistically and ethnically as well. So in Arizona, there are about 350 Yaqui speakers. 350, but there's about 15,000 down in Mexico. And so here is a voice record of this lady speaking and recording her voice so that they understand in the future what it's supposed to sound like. So here's that desired model for evolution for the languages, but in reality, that's the pattern. That's that pattern. You have this scattering of all this stuff that they cannot connect at all. Well, what about the biblical account? So let's find out how things really happened here. So we have this proliferation of languages post-judgment at Babel, which is parallel to the biological speciation post-flood after the ark. So then the ark rested in the 7th month, the 17th day of the month, on the mountains of Ararat. So this is after the flood. Now, we don't really know for sure that where the mountains of Ararat really are. Since the early 1800s, what's now called Ararat has been called that, but it's very possible that the Zagros Mountains, which you see there in western Iran, might actually be where the ark landed. We don't really know for sure. But you see the red dot down there in the plain of Shinar, and so there's no dispute about that's where folks ended up after the flood. So in Genesis 11, now the whole earth had one language and one speech, literally of one lip and one set of words, one phonology or set of sounds, one vocabulary. So therefore, this was the same language as spoken by the people before the flood, the antediluvians. So it's pretty safe to say, pretty safe bet that Hebrew was the original language of everybody prior to the flood. Well, look at the genealogies given to us in chapters 5 and in 10, especially, and onward after that. And so it's pretty clear that there were the patriarchs, then the flood, and then the families, Noah and his 3 sons and their 4 wives, and from them everyone else came. So they had the same speech, the same tongue. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found, so from the east, this is a clue, that they found a plain in the land of Shiloh and dwelt there. So maybe this really is not so much from up there where what we call Ararat today is, but maybe more from these Zagros mountains here to the east of the plain of Shinar. Then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone and they had asphalt for mortar. This is a structure that is in the same style as the Tower of Babel. It's not at all the Tower of Babel, but just that kind of architecture. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make us a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." So here's one artist's conception. You see a couple others down there as well. We don't know exactly what it looked like, but the Greek historian Herodotus in the 5th century BC saw the remnants of that tower and described it as having 8 levels, 200 feet high, about 20 modern stories high. So that's quite a structure when you think about it. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them." So he said, "Come, let us go down and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So here you see in Japanese, Nante Mashitaka, Sto ti Gavril in Russian, Was hast du gesagt in German, and Korean, I have no clue, and this project is doomed. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. If you can't understand, folks, you get frustrated, and you throw up your hands and say, okay, we can't communicate. So that's how God forced people to spread out and fill the earth. Therefore, its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there, the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. So we have these phenomenal records given to us in Genesis chapter 10 as well as 5, showing that all these peoples came from those three sons. And these names have been found in various archaeological discoveries. So there's anyone who wants to claim that this is just made up history is ignoring evidence that's been found. Premier archaeologists had this to say about Genesis 10: an astonishingly accurate document stands absolutely alone in ancient literature, without a remote parallel even among the Greeks. So this shows the territories as the three sons and their families spread out afterwards. So Japheth towards Europe, Shem and Ham in those directions. So the bottom line, the slide you saw at the beginning. Attempted parallel with biological evolution. Change in grammar is becoming more simplified, not more complex with time as evolution demands. Change in vocabulary is increasing due to intelligent input, not random chance events. Sound shifts are consistent, not random. Languages change quickly when they come in contact with each other, not uniformly. And that judgment orchard, not evolutionary tree. Now there's a couple questions that people ask. What about this business about the phrase the earth was divided? Does this mean the continents of the earth were split? Does it mean it was languages? No, because the flood had already happened. It wasn't the continents. That had already occurred during the flood. So that's not the situation. And then here we have the business of the earth being surveyed and boundaries drawn. Again, that's not the issue. It's God confusing their language so that they would not understand one another. Like that, having a difficulty. All right, I have a breaking news report for you, Euro English. Okay, European Commission just announced an agreement where English will be the official language of the European Union rather than German, which was the other possibility. As part of the negotiations, the British government conceded that English spelling had some room for improvement and has accepted a 7-year phase-in plan that would become known as Euro English. In the first year, S will replace the soft C. Certainly, this will make the civil servants jump with joy. The hard C will be dropped in favor of K. This should clear up confusion, and keyboards can have one less letter. There will be growing public enthusiasm in the second year when the troublesome PH will be replaced with F. This will make words like photograph, phosphates, and phosphorus 20% shorter. In the third year, phenomenally enthusiastic public acceptance of the new spelling can be expected to reach the stage where more complicated changes are possible. Governments will encourage the removal of double letters, which have always been a deterrent to accurate spelling and a source of aggravation. Also, all will agree that the horrible mess of the silent E in the language is disgraceful and it should go away. Why is this change so late in coming? By the fourth year, people will be receptive to steps such as replacing TH with Z and W with V. Sie Sonne, sie better, we will be so happy. During the fifth year, the unnecessary A can be dropped from words containing EA, and after the fifth year, we will have a real sensible written style. There will be no more trouble or difficulties, and everyone will find it easy to understand each other. the dream of united Europe will finally come true. And in the 60th year, we will all be speaking German like they wanted in the first place.
I love it. Yep. Yep, I love it.
Told you we'd have some fun. All right, just a bit of history about English. Okay, so English was truly a Germanic language once upon a time. And the English Isles were invaded repeatedly by various people groups. The Celts, the Romans came, so Latin was there on the scene. The Angles and the Saxons and the Danes invaded, being Germanic peoples. Then Old Norse, again from a Germanic group. Then the Normans came from France and occupied for quite a while, and that's why so much French got put into English, especially in military terms and other terms. And then Shakespeare immortalized himself with his writing. But what happened around 500 years ago or so is there was so much inconsistency all throughout the British Isles in English that the church grammarians decided to standardize everything. So, unfortunately, since they all knew Latin, they chose Latin as the mold to press English, a Germanic language, into. And that is why, in this language, the list of exceptions is longer than the list of rules. Because the Germanic language was pressed into the Latin mold. Then we have the tremendous era of seafaring and colonization, and now English fractured into all these various variations here all around the world. And I don't know your experience. How many of you have a physician who's from India or of Indian extract? A couple of you. Okay, well, down in the Phoenix area, there's a slew of them. And in my career working in the emergency department, so many times after the physician from India had spoken to the nurse and written orders and taken off, the nurse would turn to me and say, "What did he say?" Because of the strong, strong accent. Well, having spent 2 months in India and also having worked with an Indian physician when I was in training, I could understand their accents quite well, and so I would translate the Indian English into American English for the nurses. So they knew what was going on. So, all right. I would like to point out a free resource. At AzOSA.org, there's a series of 18 PowerPoints that go through the first 11 chapters of Genesis on nearly a verse-by-verse basis from the viewpoint of creation, illustrated by art and in question and answer format. So even a person in grade school ought to be able to learn from that and get a good grasp of the truth, the history, and Scripture, understanding the creation viewpoint. So I am done. It's been a long talk. You've been a great group, and I enjoyed your laughter. Thank you.
We'll start sending the wonderful wicker basket around. Questions? Brewing in your mind.
Problem is that mine were all about 35 slides back.
Yeah.
Occasionally we'll watch an English-made movie. Occasionally we will watch an English-made movie. We can't understand a word they say, and it's made in English.
One reason I think is they tend to speak more rapidly than most Americans do, and then that combined with the accent, yeah, it's tough. So.
Have you ever noticed that if you look at the world and draw a north-south line through Jerusalem, that the languages to the west are phonic and write from left to right and down, and the languages to the east appear to be more pictorial and often go from the right to the left. Especially before we got modern airplanes and everybody was moving around.
Right, yeah. Good observation. There was another hand. Yes.
I was just, oh, sorry.
Who's got it?
I was just kind of wondering in the academic world if there was anybody saying that they are the original language on the planet. I've heard people who speak Latin very well say that, you know, growing up Catholic, say that they were the original language, but obviously.
Obviously not. No, I don't think anybody who knows their stuff would say that.
We just finished a textual criticism course in 8 sections on how we got our Bible through translation, and this is really interesting because we deal with original manuscripts. How much evidence, or what kind of evidence, were they discovered that led them to believe Hebrew was the original language? Or can you talk a little bit about original language? What language did Adam and Eve speak?
Okay, I am not an expert in this field, but I think it was an older version of Hebrew. And the Hebrew alphabet has undergone changes. It originally was one of those pictorial types of alphabets as well, that there was a whole nother deep layer of meaning in the text with the older pictorial versions of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet.
I find it very interesting because my primary language was Portuguese from Portugal. My father was born in Porto, Portugal, and came to America, but we all spoke Portuguese. I flew with the Flying Samaritans and went to Brazil. I couldn't understand those people at all. And they said it was Portuguese.
Well, yes, it's interesting. I did spend some time in Brazil, and also I was in Portugal, and when I was in Portugal, they asked me if I was from Brazil. It's funny, yeah. Yeah, there's so many variations due to geography.
Yeah, but trying to learn English with the same sound meaning 4 different things? Oh, I never thought I'd ever learn it.
Yeah, it's tough. I'm glad I did not have to learn English as a second language.
In putting this together, you did a lot of research, obviously. What would you say is probably the single most important thing that came to you as a result of going through all this?
That the languages were given to us by God supernaturally at Babel, and then there was dissemination and change as people migrated and separated from each other, and that there is no one language from which all the others evolved, and that over time we have been simplifying languages instead of them becoming more complex as the evolutionary model would want it to be.
I just remember from being in the Northwest that at some point somebody said that there was a tribe of Indians in the Northwest region that had like 40 different words to describe potatoes. Small potatoes, large potatoes, red skin potatoes, brown skin potatoes. It's like, yeah, well, in certain areas that would make sense, you know. And so then to think that now we just call them spuds or potatoes, you know, and a few other varieties. But again, it's that when you see that downward trend, then you think, but that's again exactly what you pointed out, which is a total inversion of what evolution says, that they're getting more complex, more robust, better. They're just getting lamer and weaker and sillier. So, all right. The date is Tuesday, August 30th, 7 to 8:30, right here, and a biblical view of dinosaurs. So let's, if you have young children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, whatever, probably a very good talk to bring them to, or encourage their parents to bring them to. So we'll see you then, and appreciate